Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Granado, and last weekend I was abducted by aliens. It happened last weekend. I was driving home from a night out with some friends and was on a long stretch of isolated road. I saw what I thought was a star at first, then maybe a plane or a helicopter. The light got brighter and brighter, and it slowly descended towards me. As the light got closer, a strange humming sound steadily got louder and louder. The last thing I remember is my engine cutting off as a flash of light illuminated my car's interior. I remember shadows, and these shadows kind of resembled bodies that were surrounding me. They were short in stature and what looked like they had elongated heads. They put something on me, some sort of tool of some kind that they placed behind my right ear. When I woke up, I was at home in my bed, and it all kind of felt like a dream. That is until I went to the bathroom and I kind of washed my face trying to wake up. And when I woke up, I felt behind my right ear and I noticed that there was a small cut, like something had been inserted behind my ear. Sorry, I had to show a video while I said that because it was really hard for me to keep a straight face. None of what I just said is true, but what is true is last weekend I went out with a group of friends, and it was one of their birthday parties. And during this birthday party, somebody shared the fact that starting when they were a child, that they had been abducted by aliens, and they shared that these aliens took them across the universe, flew them around their spaceship, revealed secret forms of knowledge to them, and showed them other planets and other worlds. And I wanted to begin this conversation by sharing that story because I'm sure at some point in your life you've had a conversation with somebody where they maybe have shared a similar experience. Maybe not aliens, maybe it was ghosts or angels or demons, some sort of encounter with what we would classify as the supernatural, or maybe even they described an event that they would call miraculous. So what I want to do for this video is kind of walk through not necessarily how we can address those claims per se, but whether or not these claims are believable if we treat such claims as a form of argument, not like an argument in which I'm trying to demonstrate a logical point, but an argument in the sense that I'm trying to prove something to you or to get you to believe something. In the case of my alien abduction story, what I'm trying to do is to get you to believe that I was, in fact, abducted by aliens. So these sorts of claims generally have two things in common. The first is that the person who is telling you their testimony, who's telling you their story, believes that this story is true, true in the sense that it actually happened to them. And as a result, they're trying to convince you that this thing, that this event, that they actually experienced this thing. And secondly, that the content of their testimony involves something that can, loosely speaking, I say loosely because people have different definitions of this word, but that can, loosely speaking, be defined as something miraculous, be classified as something miraculous, something that does not fall within the realm of most people's everyday experience. That's what I mean by miraculous when I use it in this description. So, the sort of philosophical problem, the conundrum that we're presented with when we are in these situations and we're presented with these stories is, do we have enough evidence or do we have reason to believe that what this person is saying to us is true? Can we be rationally justified in believing what this person is claiming? So, to keep things simple, let's start with the testimony that I just gave you and assume that it's true. Should you believe that I was, in fact, abducted by aliens? And to help us work through this problem, I'm going to draw inspiration from a Scottish philosopher named David Hume, specifically his book, Essays Concerning Human Understanding, which was written in 1748. And one of the chapters of that book, sometimes it's presented as a standalone text, I'll actually link it in the description of this video, is what was referred to as Hume's Essays on Miracles. Not only will I link Hume's essay, but I'll also link some other resources talking about Hume's critique of miracles in the description of this video if you kind of want a more in-depth analysis of Hume's argument. So let's break down what I said in a more simplistic way, and then we can work through the sort of reasoning process that this involves. So instead of using that elaborate story I just gave you about my alien abduction, we're going to generalize and say that a person gives you a testimony, that they're giving you a testimony of some sort of miraculous event, and they're wanting to convince you that that event actually happened or that you should believe them. So a person gives you a testimony. So let's start off with the person. Now, I want you to think for a moment, what criteria would you normally apply to a situation in order to determine whether or not a person is trustworthy, whether or not you can believe what this person is telling you? And we don't necessarily have to frame this within the context of they're telling you something miraculous happened. Just what criteria in your day-to-day life do you use to determine whether or not you're going to believe what somebody is telling you? What's maybe they're trying to convince you of something, maybe they're giving you advice, or maybe they're just having a conversation and they're telling you about what they did the previous weekend. Now, everybody has different criteria. I just came up with a short list of questions that I think could help us think through this. Maybe you have different criteria. Feel free to let me know. But to begin with, we can start off with, do you know this person? And if you do know this person, how well do you know this person? Is this somebody you just met? In which case, if they're telling you something, you may be less likely to believe them. Or is this somebody that perhaps you've known your whole life? And if it's somebody you've known your whole life, you might be more inclined to believe what they're saying. Has this person been generally reliable or truthful in the past? Let's say, for example, you're buying a car and somebody comes up to you in the parking lot and says, "Oh, I like Toyotas. I used to own this make and model. I think it's a good car." If you don't know this person, if they're just some rando walking by you in the parking lot, then you may be less likely to believe what they have to say about a Toyota. However, if it's your friend and you've known your friend for, let's say, 20 years, and they're the type of person that likes to spend a lot of their free time working on cars, or are generally very knowledgeable about cars, maybe even they're a mechanic, then you might be more inclined to believe them. Not only are you more likely to believe them, but they would actually be an expert in that case, and you probably should believe them. You would be very logically justified in accepting their claim about the car that you're thinking about purchasing. And on a related note, do they have any experience or expertise in the field or the advice that they're giving? And is there any reason to believe that this person's judgment might be impaired in some way, right? Maybe you're talking to a friend who tells you that they went out this past weekend and they were partying with some of their friends. Maybe they were doing a little bit of bar hopping, or they're going out celebrating somebody's birthday and they claim to have seen a celebrity. Is there a situation in which you might doubt their judgment? Maybe their judgment was impaired by some of the substances that they were consuming and they thought that they saw somebody they didn't. Or does the person have a motive to be lying to you for some reason? So if the car salesman, to go back to the car example, is telling you that it's a good car, you might have reason to doubt what that person's saying to you because they're trying to sell you something. So starting off with that first statement, a person gives you a testimony. What criteria are we using to determine how much validity we are going to give that person? But going back to the alien abduction example, let's assume that all of these boxes are checked. Let's assume that you and I are really close friends. We've known each other for most of our lives, and I tell you this alien abduction story. We have a great friendship, and you can rely on me, and we've been through a lot of issues and struggles together and all of that good stuff. Let's assume that all of those boxes are checked and you generally perceive me to be a good person. So let's go on to the second part of that statement, gives you a testimony. As I mentioned before, I'm using this word testimony here very loosely to mean someone telling you a story or making a claim about an experience that they had or an event that they witnessed. And typically speaking, when somebody does this, they're trying to convince you of something, even if that thing is just they're trying to convince you that this thing actually happened or that they actually witnessed this thing. Now, before we get into the miraculous part of the event, let's make it even more basic. If I told you, let's start off with an even more simple claim. Let's say that you and I are talking, and I told you that I ate eggs and a piece of toast for breakfast this morning. Is that a believable claim? Are you rationally justified in believing that I ate 2 eggs and a piece of toast for breakfast? Well, generally speaking, yes, there are a lot of good reasons to assume that I'm telling you the truth and that my testimony is truthful in this situation. Let's say because of our friendship, you know me pretty well, and you know that I'm on a pretty strict diet, and that for this, as a part of this diet, every single morning I eat 2 eggs and a piece of toast. Well, then it's just kind of a not kind of, it would just be a very uncontroversial claim. You probably wouldn't even think twice about it. You probably just would assume, well, yeah, Michael's telling the truth because that's what he eats every single morning. But even if you didn't know the details of my diet, you still might just automatically believe me because in the United States, eggs and toast is a pretty common breakfast that people eat. So that wouldn't really be too far out of the ordinary for somebody to claim to do. Now, let's complicate it a little bit. Let's say that I told you that for breakfast this morning, I had fresh Italian pastries delivered from my favorite bakery in Rome. Do you have good reasons to believe that claim? Well, on the one hand, that claim is sort of believable because maybe I have been to Rome. Maybe I do have a Roman bakery that I oftentimes talk about. And I tell you how delicious all of these different pastries I tried when I went there was. Maybe I'm just a really big foodie, and pastries is something that I like to sample throughout my life. And it's something that I like to share with people and talk with people about. In that case, it might be somewhat believable, but let's use me as a real life example. If you know me, you would know that I've never been to Italy, I've never been to Rome. And also, I live in Savannah, Georgia. So there's a lot of logistical complications to consider how we're getting those pastries from some small bakery in Rome all the way to Savannah, Georgia. But even that is not necessarily outside of the realm of possibility. There are other considerations to take. For example, the fact that I'm a lowly high school and college instructor. Teachers don't really tend to make that much money. So you might have good reason to doubt that I'm ordering these pastries based on the fact of how expensive it would be. And that would be kind of an unlikely indulgence for somebody in my economic position to partake in. Maybe. So we go from a very likely situation in which I have 2 eggs and a piece of toast to a more unlikely situation in which I'm specially ordering bakery baked goods from some small bakery in Rome and having them shipped all the way to my house. What makes the first situation likely is how common of an experience that is and how much that relates to what you know into what you've experienced. What makes the second situation more unlikely is that that's not something that really happens on a regular basis, although you can conceive of it happening maybe with somebody who's in a different circumstance than I am. The short of it is, we generally tend to accept people's testimonies if that testimony corresponds to our basic experience of the world and how we know and understand the world to work. So now, considering that, given that, let's turn our attention to more miraculous claims. Now, the word miraculous can mean a lot of different things for a lot of people. Sometimes when people talk about miraculous events, they talk about situations that are unlikely. So, for example, maybe somebody almost got into a car wreck and they might say it's a miracle that they did not get into a car wreck. And if they're using the word miraculous in that sense, you're still talking about something that is natural or something that falls within the realm of possibility. People avoid car wrecks every day. But when Hume talks about miraculous claims and miraculous testimonies, he's referring to those testimonies that invoke the divine, the supernatural, that invoke phenomenon that don't necessarily fit into what he refers to as the laws of nature. Now, when I talk about the laws of nature, a lot of people will understand that to mean me talking about like scientific rules, regulations, mathematical descriptions of regularities that we observe in nature. But that's not necessarily what Hume specifically is referring to. For laws of nature, Hume is really just talking about in our common everyday experience of the world, we have accumulated a sort of natural assumption and understanding of how the world and how reality operates. So, when we say the laws of nature here, you can just think of those things that we have experienced on a regular basis. Since alien abductions, going back to my initial testimony of the alien abduction experience that I did not have, since alien abductions do not happen to most people on a regular basis, and since you most likely have not been abducted by aliens, then according to Hume, you would have good reason to doubt my testimony. Even if you think I was a credible person, even if we have been lifelong friends, you have to weigh the singular claim of my testimony over and against what evidence has already established for you, over and against what you know and understand how reality operates, what Hume calls those laws of nature. And you can think of this kind of as existing, and this is kind of how Hume presents it, as existing on this imaginary scale. And every day we add like a little piece of evidence to one side of that scale. Because every day I have experiences that kind of reinforce my belief about how nature and reality works. I believe and make certain assumptions based off of those actions. For example, that if I go to lift this empty can, that my arm's going to lift this empty can. That's not to say that there aren't exceptions to that, right? I've had experiences where I have tried to move certain parts of my body but have been unable to. But even then, that would go in a separate but similar pile of evidence. What I have never experienced is being able to telepathically, is that the right word? Telekinesis is lifting things with your mind. I've never had telekinetic powers to be able to lift a can, to will a can to be lifted with my brain. That falls outside of my common everyday experience. And Hume would argue that because miracles represent a violation of the laws of nature, then it would be very rare, if ever, if we are rationally justified in believing a miraculous testimony. In other words, we don't really have a good reason to believe somebody if they tell us that they experienced or witnessed a miraculous event. Why? Because what is more likely the case? That this person actually experienced a miraculous event, or that they were somehow deceived, mistaken, or they are being intentionally deceptive in their description for whatever reason. So, the question that we are left with after wrestling with Hume's explanation and critiques of miracles is a pretty simple yet complicated one. Is there ever any good reason to believe in miraculous testimonies? Can we ever be rationally justified in believing someone else's testimony about a miraculous event? And on that note, that's where I'll end this video. But feel free to tell me, to explain to me in the comment section whether you agree or disagree with Hume. And if you disagree with Hume, this is the most important question. How would you respond to that? What criteria would you use? I'll see you all next time.